There was a time where if you wanted to listen to music, you had to drop a needle on your record player and let it touch the vinyl. You had to pop your cassette tape into your Walkman, or you had to load your CDs into your CD player. With record players and vinyl, you were forced to listen to an album from start to finish because it was inconvenient to listen to songs out of order. With the record player, you had to lift the needle and drop it at the correct groove for the start of the next song. And with the cassette, you either had to flip the cassette or you had to rewind or fast forward through a tape, which could risk you ruining your tape. It wasn't until the CD came out that you were easily able to skip songs. All you had to do was press the right button. But even then, you were still limited to the songs that were actually stored on that album. But the CD did change everything, because the CD allowed people to make mixtapes more easily than ever before. And for those of you youngins, a mixtape was essentially the equivalent to today's playlists. It was a list of tracks that you liked that you specifically curated for your music listening. All they had to do was burn their already downloaded songs onto a blank disc. And this really changed the way people listen to music. No longer did you have to listen to an entire album in order from start to finish. No longer did you have to listen to a full album at all. And when musical digital players came out, it only amplified that idea in ways that were previously unimaginable. And it might be hard to understand if you weren't there for that era, or if you didn't have an older sibling who lived through that era. But when the iPod came out and when iTunes started getting rolling, the music industry was never the same. You didn't have to buy full albums anymore. You didn't even need to buy the singles. You could buy the deep cuts of an album if that's what you really wanted to do, because you could buy the individual songs in whatever way you wanted. You got to choose the songs that you wanted to add to your library, and you could listen to them in any order because you weren't dependent on a disc or an analog device like a tape or like a vinyl record. And then obviously, the streaming model amplified this even more. And the more and more that I engage with how the general population listens to music, the more I realize that most people don't listen to albums the same way that I do. Alright, so I consider myself to be a pretty smart person. I've always been good in school, I always got good grades, I plan on pursuing future education, past my undergrad. I can't help but make some stupid mistakes sometimes. Obviously, you saw with the last video, I messed up my iPod. So I went to buy a new iPod. I bought an iPod Mini, and actually I also bought an iPod Nano. The Nano to use in the gym or to be able to, run with a wireless connection, but also just because it's real tiny. It's unintrusive. And then I bought the iPod Mini because it's the cheapest of the iPod Classic family. I guess it's technically not an iPod Classic, but hopefully you're picking up my drift here. And tell me why on both of them I put my address, but I forgot to put my apartment number on them, so they're both being returned to the sender. I just can't seem to win right now. I'm making silly mistakes left and right. Maybe this is the world telling me to slow down, right? Because sometimes you just gotta slow down. I don't know. I think I'm ready for a nap. Okay, so I'm not trying to be pretentious or saying that I listen to music better than everybody else. There is no wrong way to listen to music. Unless you listen to albums on shuffle. That's wrong. My listening habits really started with my older brother. I was born in 2001, so I was right on the line between being a millennial and being Gen Z. My older brother was probably considered a millennial. He might not like hearing that, but it's the truth. And because my brother was in that age group, I learned a lot from him that some other people my age would never learn on their own. I knew what AOL was, I knew what cassette tapes were, I knew what VHS was, because that's what my brother grew up on. And it's not like we just got rid of it when I was born, it was still in the house. And as a teenager, my brother was a big collector of CDs. And he had a stereo system at home that he used to play those CDs. And his favorite album to play on repeat was The Carter 3 by Lil Wayne. I remember hearing every song on that album on loop for days at a time. And I'm glad I did, because The Carter 3 is one of the greatest rap albums of all time. I used to collect those old Jax WWE figures that were real tiny. They were called Microaggression, a name that, by the way, has not aged very well. But I remember I would make up my own storylines playing with these action figures, and I would book my own pay-per-views for these shows. And every year being the end of my play session, I would book my WrestleMania for the year. And every year, the theme song for that WrestleMania would be Mr. Carter from The Carter 3, because that song was on loop all the time, and it just so happened to be playing whenever I was playing with my action figures. Then while I was in middle school, as a Christmas gift, I got an iPod Touch 4th generation, and this was heaven to a kid like me. This was the first time I had a device where I could listen to music on the go without being embarrassed of taking it out in front of other people. I had my Nintendo DS and I had my Nintendo 3DS, but let's be honest. When you're on the cusp of being in high school and you're super worried about how everyone is going to judge you because you're a teenager and that's what teenagers do, you don't want to pull out the Nintendo when everyone else is pulling out their iPhones. So the iPod Touch was a big game changer for me. And maybe it's partially OCD, but I could never just download one song and call it a day. I didn't like having songs in my library without also having the album that song came off from also being in my library, even if I only liked just the one song. And this forced me to listen to albums in full to decide if I actually liked them or not, because I wasn't going to spend all that time and effort downloading all of these songs just to not listen to them. And then around the time that I got into high school, streaming services like Spotify and Tidal really started to take off. And at this time, it was the Wild West of streaming services. I don't think a lot of people remember. Streaming services used to have streaming service exclusive albums or streaming service exclusive artists tied to them. And this sucked. Because if you wanted to listen to Jay-Z or Kanye West, you had to download Tidal. If you wanted to listen to Dr. Dre or Snoop Dogg, you had to use Apple Music. If you wanted to listen to Taylor Swift, you would have to use Spotify, if that's your thing. And this was awful. Everyone at the time agreed that this was a horrible tactic for the streaming industry, because essentially, if you were someone who fell into the camp of being a fan of Taylor Swift, Jay-Z, and Dr. Dre, well, in order to listen to all of those artists, you had to buy all three of those subscription services, which were probably costing you $30 a month. So this is really when I started to buy CDs, even though by this point, they were already starting to be phased out of the market. I remember buying copies of Dr. Dre's Compton, which had just come out, and I remember buying copies of Jay-Z's old discography because you couldn't find those on streaming services. You had to have either a physical copy or a downloaded copy if you wanted to listen to them without downloading two separate streaming services. I was already kind of sparking that love of collecting physical music that would carry on until my adult life. And that's when I really started to care about how I would listen to music, because I would listen to an album all the way through. And I feel like that's something that's just not as common as it used to be. You didn't have a choice before. Nowadays, you can listen to whatever songs on a streaming service you want without having to think about listening to the deep cuts, or you can skip any songs you don't like. And I feel like that's cool, it's convenient, but it kind of takes away from the grand picture of what an album is supposed to be. And then I realized that a lot of my peers didn't listen to albums all the way through. They chose the songs that they liked, and that's what they listened to. They would listen to playlists, and often these playlists weren't even made by them. They were made by other people, and that's how they listened to music. Or when a new album would drop by an artist that they liked, they would listen to the album all the way through one time, and that was the only time they listened to the album in full. After that, they just picked their favorite songs, or whatever songs were the most popular, and those are the songs that got the repeats and the streams. Man, I get it, okay? Sometimes I'll just listen to a few songs from an artist that I like. I don't necessarily need to listen to an album every single time I want to listen to an artist. But when I do have time to listen to an album, I'm going to listen to the whole album. An album like To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar is one of my favorite albums of all time. And I could listen to a few songs off of it and be fine. Okay, I could listen to King Kunta, I could listen to These Walls, and I could listen to these songs and not feel the need to listen to the album. Songs like King Kunta and These Walls I could listen to in isolation and be fine, but every time I do listen to them, I get the need, the want to listen to the album in full and appreciate it for what it is as a whole and not just as a single. An album like Third Eye Blind's self-titled debut, I can't just listen to one or two songs off that album. I gotta listen to the whole thing. It's perfect. I don't want to skip songs. I want to enjoy the experience. An album like The Stranger by Billy Joel, I remember the first time listening to that when I was 17 years old and thinking it was the greatest thing in the world. I listened to that album on loop for ages after that. It's still in rotation. People who review albums the moment that they come out, I don't understand how you can have your thoughts fully formed on these albums when they're brand new. I get it, we're in the era of rapid consumerism and instant gratification, but this is how I listen to an album. All right, here's all the different methods that I use to listen to music throughout the years. It all started with this bad boy, the Nintendo DSi. Now this thing is beat up, it hasn't been turned on in many years because the battery is dead, but it had a nice little headphone jack at the bottom where you could plug in some headphones, you could put in an SD card, a full-size SD card by the way, not that micro SD card stuff, this was the 2010s. But you would play your music that way, and that's how I would listen to music for the longest time as a kid. And then eventually, I got a little bit older. My parents trusted me with an iPod Touch. They didn't trust me with a phone yet. I'd use an iPod Touch. And I used this thing for a long, long time. This is where I really started to take my music listening pretty serious, where I would have, the songs loaded up and I would make sure that the metadata was correct on the files to the best of my ability. I was like 12, but that's how I listened to music for a very long time. This thing had Bluetooth too, so I could connect it to speakers, and that was a game changer. Then, of course, we've got the CDs, right? The CDs. So these are actually some new ones that I bought at a music store recently for a couple bucks. Okay, Matchbox 20, good album, right? Some Cariño by Lucero, right? Okay, this is some new stuff. Actually, it's some old stuff, but I found this at a music store. I used to love Cariño. That was one of my favorite songs. Fun fact, when I was in middle school, I was in a mariachi and I sang that song, I think, for one of our performances. I sure hope there's no video that exists of that. And then lastly, we've got La Quinta Estación. This is a Spanish band that I recently started listening to. They do the theme song for Místico. Me Muero is the name of the song, right? Místico is a wrestler. So, the first time I heard that song was through wrestling. And I found this at a music store, and I was so shocked because they had very little Spanish music in general. And to find this band, which is, they're not like super obscure or anything, but they are kind of niche, to find them at a music store that, doesn't even sell that much Spanish music was awesome. And then we've got the iPods that I've been using as of late. This is one that, again, doesn't work. These Nanos are really bad with their battery life. This thing does not work unless it's plugged in. This is more of decoration at this point. And my other iPod is currently still broken. So these are kind of on hold for now until I can find a good replacement for them. But, these are probably still my favorite way to listen to music right now. You can just take it on the go, slip this in your pocket, throw in some headphones, and you can listen to hours and hours of music without any distraction. And then we've got probably the most old school way to listen to music that, currently still exists, but it's also one of the most popular ways to listen to music right now, and that's vinyl records. First of all, shout out Bad Bunny. Who's excited for Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance? I know I am. Me and my family are going to go crazy for that. But, vinyl is so cool because you can do so much with it, or I should say it offers an experience that you just don't get with like a CD or streaming, right? You're not going to get this artwork inside of a CD. I mean, maybe in a CD, but it's not going to be as quality and as large. And you're definitely not going to get this artwork with streaming services. So it's really cool to have these, and these are really what got me back into listening to music properly, because you're forced to. You have no other option unless you want to move your needle around, and that just seems like more work than it's worth. But of course, if you're going to listen to music, you got to have some good ways to listen to that music. You can't beat the classics. These things still work to this day. You're going to have your, gym headphones, right? Listen to music while you work out, while you get a good pump in. Probably the most popular way to listen to music right now is these bad boys, right? AirPods or wireless headphones where you can just pop them in each ear and you're good to go. These were game changers, I keep using that word, but these were game changers when they first came out, man. To have truly wireless headphones, like that was unimaginable when they first came out. It was quite a big deal. But of course, sometimes you want to listen a little bit more intensely. I got the sound canceling Sony XM4s, right? You've probably heard of these. These are legendary throughout the internet. But, if you want to get some real serious listening, I got some studio headphones in here. These are some AKG30s or K361s is what they are. Right? I bought these at a music store probably 2 years ago now. These are real freaking great. Sound quality is awesome on these. And they're not that expensive. I think it was like 80 to 100 bucks when I bought these. But sometimes you want to get loud, right? Sometimes you want to get loud. I got some Edifier speakers that I have in my living room that can connect to my record player, to my iPod, to Bluetooth, to my TV. So this little remote, is what I use all the time to control that music. Good stuff, all right? I think if you're really going to be listening to music, you got to have multiple ways to listen to music. I think listening to music in one way is just boring. You got to have different ways to attack the music, man. I love my music, I love the sound, and I love the variety that I get with all of my options. The more options you got, the better. And a lot of these you just can't do with streaming. I mean, other than the headphones and stuff. But, you're not going to get Spotify on this bad boy. Maybe you're going to get Spotify in these. I don't even know if it works anymore. You're not going to get Spotify included in this. You're not going to get Spotify in that. You're not going to get Spotify on this. But you're going to get a better experience than Spotify or Apple Music with these actual physical items. So how does it start? The way that I listen to music all depends on what I want to get out of the music. I'm Latino. Sometimes it's as simple as I just need some music to play in the background while I do some cleaning. My mom used to play her favorite CDs and her favorite radio stations over the weekends while she was cleaning, and naturally that rubbed off on me. When I'm cleaning my apartment, my room, my bathroom, my kitchen, or I'm just doing dishes, it's so easy to throw on some music and listen to them while I work. And that's some easy, mindless listening. Letting your body do all the listening without necessarily thinking too hard about any substance. Not to say music has to be mindless, but it's very low stakes. The listening isn't the main objective of the task. You know, when streaming came out and I started subscribing, I found that I would listen to new albums when they came out, but I wouldn't really revisit them as often as I used to. And while maybe I was being exposed to more music than ever before, the music didn't have the same staying power as before. And that's when I had to eat my words, as I used to make fun of my friends all the time for collecting vinyl records because it was so expensive compared to just streaming. But now I understand, sometimes that inconvenience, the hurdles that you have to jump through, make the experience of listening to music that much more enjoyable. And that's when I fell in love with albums again. The most important part about listening to albums is enjoying it over and over again. It's so easy to move on from an album, especially when you already have your favorite tracks that you listen to over and over again, but that's like eating your steak but ignoring all the vegetables on the plate that taste so good. What are you, 5? Just like you understand a book the more and more that you read it, or a movie the more and more that you watch it, you understand and appreciate music the more and more that you repeat your listens. I've gone back and listened to my favorite albums and noticed vocals, ad-libs, and instrumentals that I didn't notice the first time I listened to the album, or the most recent time that I listened to the album. Music is just one of my favorite parts of being alive. And while I enjoy listening to music in some pretentious ways sometimes, I can't discredit listening to some music for no reason other than you wanting some background noise. But when we appreciate albums for the complete piece of art that they are, the music just sounds that much better.